Okay, today what we're going to be doing is talking about the theory that scientists use to help explain why populations begin to increase and decrease and what are the transitions they go inside of each stage. So we're going to talk about the four basic stages of demographic transition, and we're going to talk about why different countries are at different stages of those transitions. So this is Roman numeral 2a. One reason for the dramatic increase in Earth's human population in the last 200 years is due to death rates declining. B, death rates have declined due to several factors. Number one, more people have access to adequate food, clean water, and adequate sewage disposal. If your death rates decline, then people are living longer and people aren't getting sick. And all of those are attributed to these three factors for the most part. Number two, the discovery of vaccines in the 20th century meant that fewer people died from disease. So anything you can think of, pneumonia, tuberculosis, any of those kinds of bacterial infections that people used to die from can now be controlled with vaccines, and because of vaccines we can now develop an immunity to diseases that used to cause people to die. C, in addition, life expectancy also has greatly increased. Life expectancy is the average number of years a person is likely to live. Since people are living longer and more children survive, then more people are alive at the same time, increasing the population. A long time ago, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, the life expectancy in a lot of places was only 30 or 40 years. And so because of that, generations were very short. So even though children were being born, a lot of them didn't survive because of disease and things like that. But you also had people dying younger. So you never had as many people alive all at the same time. If you look at this map, it kind of gives you an idea of what the life expectancy is in different countries as of 2012. And if you'll notice, lots and lots of countries have life expectancies of 75 years or more. In fact, the majority of the world, that is the life expectancy. The United States, we have a life expectancy of approximately 80 years. Males and females don't have the same life expectancy, but that's the average. So, for example, life expectancy worldwide, in other words, if you average everybody in the world, it's 67 years. While life expectancy in developed countries is almost 80 years. So if we average just the developed countries, it would be about 80. In 1950, worldwide life expectancy was less than 50 years, while in developed countries it was less than 70. So in the 60 or so years since then, life expectancy has increased by more than 10 years. So in other words, everybody who's born is probably going to stay alive a little longer, and that means more people alive at the same time. D, in most developed countries, populations have stopped growing. Now, the United States bucks that trend. Our population has not stopped growing, but it's not as much due to births as it is to migration. E, the theory of demographic transition is a model that tries to explain how a country can experience a population explosion in one century, then have a shrinking population the next century. So this diagram helps to explain it, and we're going to be talking about different pieces of this diagram as we go. There's generally considered to be 4 different phases, where you start with the first phase with high birth rates and death rates, and by the time you get to the last phase, you have lower birth rates and death rates. And then you have the stuff going on in between. So we're going to talk about each of those 4 phases and what actually happens. F. This theory proposed 4 stages of population change based on the industrialization of that particular country. So the first stage, or stage 1, is pre-industrial. All countries start here. In this stage, birth and death rates are both high, and the population size is stable or grows very slowly. In other words, even though you may have a lot of children being born, you also have a lot of people dying, so they kind of balance each other out, so the population just stays kind of stable. This was true in most of the world until about 1700, when the scientific and industrial revolutions began. Alright, so right now we're going to look at this part of the chart. Notice what it has right here. The blue line is the death rate, the red line is the birth rate, and the greenish line is the size of the population. So look what this is showing. You have birth and death rates that are pretty much equal. They're the same. And look at the size of the population way down here. So death rates and birth rates kind of cancel each other out, so the population stays pretty low. In stage 2, we call it the transitional stage. A population explosion occurs because death rates decline due to improved conditions while birth rates remain high. Many countries of the world that have experienced stage 2 saw a quadruple increase in population in as little as 30 years. So in other words, your population is growing at an enormous rate during this stage. So here's the part we're talking about in stage 2. Let's look at the lines. You still have a pretty high birth rate, but look what happened to the death rate, the blue line. It dropped off dramatically. So that meant that you had a lot of people being born, but nowhere near as many people dying. So you get this huge increase right here in the size of your population. In stage 3, we call it the industrial stage. The population rates begin to slow because the birth rates begin to decrease and move close to the death rates. The population stabilizes, but it's much larger due to the surge in numbers in stage 2. Alright, so in this part of the chart, we're going to look at this section right here. Notice, the birth rate's dropping off too. Now that happens for a lot of reasons. One, more women are going into the workforce, and so because of that they're not having as many children. Secondly, due to medical advances, there's usually birth control more available and is cheap enough that a lot of people can afford it. So you get this drop in birth rates. The death rates are already low due to improved conditions. However, look up here at this line. This is the population size. Because of what happened in the previous stage, you still have high birth rates, or high population size. The fourth stage is called post-industrial. This is where most of the industrialized countries today are. Birth rates drop below replacement level. Replacement level is the average number of children each parent must have to replace themselves, in other words, 2. The size of the population may actually begin to decrease. So in other words, you're now having each woman's average children, or average size number of children that they're having, is 2 or less. So that means they're not having enough to even replace themselves. Alright, so now we're looking at this stage right here. Notice, birth rates are still dropping, death rates have kind of leveled off, but both are still really low. But because all of the birth rates have still continued to drop, now you start getting a decrease in the size of the population as a result. Now it's still higher than what you had originally, but it is dropping. G, for most countries, it may take several generations for these 4 stages to occur. Like we said, when you really started seeing stage 2 beginning to occur anywhere was around 1700. So we're talking about 400 years that it has taken for all of this to occur, for instance, in industrialized countries. Now, in developing countries where it's not industrialized, they may still be in one like stage 2. So they're still showing an increase in population size, even though their birth rates and death rates may be dropping. H, the factors most clearly related to a decline in population size are increasing education for women, along with economic independence. Once women, and this isn't because of any kind of stereotype, this is just facts that have been discovered through studying and researching. When women become educated, that allows them to become more economically independent. In other words, they're not dependent on their mate to provide for them and their children anymore. Once the female has enough education to provide some of her financial support, there's usually a drop in the number of children she'll have, and that's because she is now part of the workforce most of the time. And that's all for today.